Good morning. Today is March the 31st, the first Monday. Oh, no, that's not. It's the last Monday of March. And April Fool's is tomorrow. So in honor of tomorrow, I wanted to get you with something, but I don't know. I'm going to slide it in throughout the episode. April Fool's, something like that. Because some people inevitably will listen to this on April Fool's. Right?
Inevitably, huh?
Because what if someone's busy on Monday? So anyway, any hoozle. Today is Monday, and there is a brand new episode of the Dear Church podcast. And today we are talking about a couple different things. I wanted to address the doctrines or the thoughts behind atheism, agnosticism, theism, deism, all these isms we'll be talking about. And I know that, some of these terms may be hard to memorize or remember, but I just wanted to talk about these things because we are surrounded by people that subscribe to these beliefs, maybe at our workplace, maybe even in our families. And so I wanted to talk about them to see how we can interact with our friends and our loved ones and how we can evangelize to them best. So that is what we will talk about. Are we talking about Signal today? I don't even know what there is to talk about.
I don't know. You come up with it.
Because we can, but I just don't know what I would ask. Was it a good thing?
Was it a good thing? Yeah, it was a great thing.
Should we all install Signal?
I have Signal.
Do you actually?
Yeah.
Can you signal me?
I can invite you to a conversation, yeah.
I'm going to be named JD in honor of Vance Refrigeration. Today is March 31st. You are listening to the Dear Church podcast. Welcome to the Dear Church podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Yang, and we have with us Pastor Gene, Chinsuk, and Brian all here. And today, again, we are recording an episode on the different theological beliefs that are surrounding our area, with the main question of how can we minister to those who are atheist, agnostic, or even deist. So, and this was brought up by a conversation that I had recently. And on this podcast, we talk a lot about how we are to engage with false teaching or heresy whenever we see something that pops up in the social media or news cycle. We want to talk about it because we want to equip our listeners with the truth of how to lovingly engage, I guess, and to think about these different ideas that are brought forth from the mind of man. And I know that these are different views that we're talking about today, and we're putting 3 to 4 different views into one episode, but I do think they are related. And so if we could talk a little bit about the religion of atheism and those who may identify as agnostic or deist, we may have conversations with coworkers, friends, family members who say, oh, I don't believe in God, or, oh, I believe in a God. I believe in a higher power. I just don't know which one it is. Or even, I don't know whether God exists or doesn't exist, and who am I to really make a conclusion on that? I'm sure a lot of us have had conversations that have led to that kind of place, and perhaps we don't know how to respond to that. Or we'll hear things like, I just don't believe in organized religion. It just caused too much pain in the world. I'm just spiritual. That's just me. I'm just a spiritual being. And so, there's a lot of talking points, but this was sparked by a conversation that I had actually with a gas station attendant. So I had this conversation and they asked me, what do you do for work? Which is odd. But I said, oh, I work at a church. I do the children's education at our church. And he goes, oh, wow. Out of all places, you work at a church. I was like, yeah. He's like, do you never really hear that? I was like, yeah, I guess. I mean, I hear it because I work there, but I guess. And yeah. And it made me think, how many of our people have conversations where they bring up their faith to any random person? And oftentimes I think when we do bring up our faith, we're hit with those responses. I don't believe in God, or I don't know, or I don't like organized religion, or whatever it might be. Or I used to go to church when I was younger. And you always bring up conversations that you have on the golf course with people, and once you tell them that you're a pastor, they'll bring up their religious history, so to speak. So I thought maybe we should have a conversation like this, where we can kind of have an understanding of what these different belief systems believe, and also how we can respond, and how, most importantly, we can evangelize and pray for our friends and family members that may be in one of these camps. And so I wanted to just define it before I ask any questions. Atheism, from a, without, and theos, a God, so belief that there is no God. Agnosticism is from a, without, and nostos is a Greek word meaning known. So it's a belief that it is impossible to know whether or not a divine being or beings exist. And an agnostic person is a person who neither believes or disbelieves in a God. This is from dictionary.com, by the way. Theism, belief that there is a God. Deism, a theist who believes in God, but this God does not meddle with the universe, often connected to Newton's clockwork universe theory. God made the clock, he wound the clock, but is governed by laws of science. This is all from dictionary.com. And so the question is, as a pastor and as a Christian that's lived in the New York tri-state area, I'm sure you have experienced conversations with all of these different beliefs. What are some underlying foundational tenets of these different faiths that we must know and be able to tackle, and how can we best share the gospel with those that may be struggling through these beliefs?
Yeah. I think one of the fallacies that people still hold on to is, if you want to talk to an atheist, if you want to talk to an agnostic or a non-Christian, you have to know everything about their side.
Right.
It's not true. Mm-hmm. You just have to know the gospel. Mm-hmm. And before that, if you want to minister, so this is not debate. We're not talking about debate. We're talking about how do you minister to people. If you want to minister to a certain person or to a group of people, whatever it is, then you have to pray for them. I think that's what it is. Pray and then go with the gospel at hand. And we just read this morning about, Christ sending the disciples out.
During our staff.
The 72, devos, right?
Yeah.
And those are the people that he just said, go with what you know. And, tell them about Jesus. And if they don't accept you, then, shake the dust off your shoes. And that's going to be symbolic of them being shaken out of the kingdom. But in the same way, a lot of people think that I have to know every single detail and how to argue every single point. Not necessarily true. It's not a bad thing to know, by the way.
Yeah.
I think it's a positive overall to know, let's say, certain arguments to come from, what we believe here in this presuppositional context of debate and arguing. And then, bringing that into, let's say, any kind of back and forth you might have with someone. That's fine. But if you say, well, I'm not confident in any of these things, I just know that Jesus Christ is Lord, we are sinners, we need to submit ourselves to his lordship, he will save us, that's good. In my opinion, that's good enough. So if you have that, and you pray for that person, and you tell them about the gospel, that's good.
But there is some aspect of fear I think a lot of people have, and this is kind of the fear that many have when I ask, do you share the gospel, whether it's a small group or whatever it may be. People say, yeah, but I don't know what to say. And when they ask me questions, or when they tell me stuff like, well, I don't believe in a God, I don't know how to say, like, but you should, or like, oh, I don't know if God is real or not, but he is real. So like, how do you, I guess, where is the point?
Well, for me, I want to go at from which dimension they're actually saying it. I don't believe in a God. In Proverbs it says, the fool says in his heart there is no God. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the word fool in Proverbs, there's two dimensions at least. And it is it is to a certain degree intellectually, meaning you can't reason well. But the other side is morally. So a lot of the times when they say fool, it's talking about this inability to get to a moral level. And that's the fool. So the fool says in his heart there is no God. It's not just simply the inability intellectually to get to that knowledge. It is morally. So when you're talking to someone and they say, I don't believe in a God, you could ask why. Why don't you believe in a God? And if they come at you with certain intellectual arguments, I do believe that it's nice to be equipped with certain responses that can respond to, a lot of these very common claims about there can't be a God because of this, and this, which, I believe we're going to get to. But I think for the most part, it is a moral stance, meaning they don't believe in a God because they saw Jesus teach these things. They saw the Bible teach these things. Some of them are good, but some of them I don't agree with. So it's a moral superiority that they hold over what the Bible teaches, what Christ has taught. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it really is a moral issue for a lot of people, which they will mask as intellectual. And trying to, sift through that so that they can come to that understanding. It's like, well, your real issue is a moral issue. It's not an intellectual issue. I do believe takes the Holy Spirit's power. I don't think you can actually reason your way into someone showing them that actually you're not the moral, arbiter of all things. Whether you like it or not, that's not how things work. It's whether they are. And then you could actually go and maybe debunk some of their intellectual criticisms or arguments that they have. And that's totally fine with me. I like doing that. But one thing I have found is if God doesn't change the heart, it doesn't matter if you beat him in a debate.
No.
Yeah, but it is important that you beat him in a debate, though, because God's truth is truth. And, if it is truth, then it will win out on all these whatever criticisms or arguments that the atheist or agnostic or non-believer might have.
So for an atheist, right, who doesn't believe that there is a God.
This gas attendant was an atheist?
No. To be honest, the gas attendant said nothing about religion. It just sparked a thought that I had. But if, we have friends that are atheists or just even the atheist belief. You talked about a moral argument. What do you mean by that? Because someone that's atheist could say, there's no God, that's just how I feel, that's just what I think, that's just my truth. Obviously, it's not, it's kind of difficult to argue with that because now we're in a culture where your truth is just objective now and everything is just your truth. And so how can you talk to someone like this? And again, I know you said prayer, but just logically helping us think through speaking with an atheist, where would we even begin? I know you said moral, but what do you mean by that?
There's a lot that we could go through before we get to the intellectual arguments. But if there is a standard or a moral law, then you have to subject yourself to it. One thing I didn't mention in our reflection today on Mark 6 could be relevant. Why did King Herod kill John the Baptist? And it says it's because, Mark is explaining, because he really liked John the Baptist, actually. He liked listening to him. He didn't agree with him, especially on the part where when he married Herodias, his brother's wife, and John spoke out against him. He really liked the other things he had to say because he was a righteous man. And I think that's a lot of people. A lot of people are like that. They really like listening to true wisdom and righteousness because that's the kind of people, I think a lot of people are like that in that sense. I'm not saying everyone is, but a lot of people are like that, especially if you're someone in power. You understand that there needs to be order. Without order, your power is so burdensome, and you have to do so many things that will be so destructive. If people just don't listen, let's say we degrade in society to a place where no one just listens to the law. Everybody just does whatever they want, which is what we have been saying was the danger of what the Biden administration will continue on, doing, the fruits of the Biden administration from his tenure and on. What's going to happen? What's going to happen is martial law. Whether the law is good or bad, people won't listen to it. And if they don't listen to it, what's going to happen? You can't have a running society. If you can't have a running society, you're going to have to put in order, force order in. Herod knew about that. And so he understood, I think, to a good degree about the goodness of order. But what he didn't want to do was submit himself to that order. Because he didn't subject himself to the order, and it was on that one thing. It was on the one thing where he just wanted to marry his brother's wife, Herodias. I want to marry my brother's wife, And that's the one thing I won't do. You see, no matter what it is, if we put ourselves above the law, the moral order, what we are doing is we're saying we become the person where the order will flow out from. And if order is going to flow out from you, then there's going to be massive disorder because order cannot flow out from you. We need to subject ourselves to the order, and that means there is a higher being that gives the order. And so if I want to sleep, there's a lot of people, we're not Herod, I get it, but a lot of people stop coming to church. Why? And I got to tell you, it's because of that number one reason, the list that Paul keeps on saying, is what sinners do. It's sexual immorality. They want to sleep with whomever they want. They don't want to get married. They think kids are not a good thing, or they're at your own timing whenever you want. So you become the ultimate authority over your life. You don't want to subject yourself to anything. Because of that, what then happens is your life is in shambles and chaos because from you cannot flow this ultimate moral standard because you are inconsistent. You are actually immoral, and you cannot actually hold that weight of moral arbiter as you so claim that you want to. So people don't believe in Jesus. Like, yeah, he said a lot of good things, but didn't he also say some things that I don't agree with? Yep. So that's why Jesus is a good teacher, but he's not my Lord and Savior. And so that's what a lot of people will say, because ultimately they do not want to follow the order that God has set forth. And so they are rebels. And you can say, oh, Herod was so close. He really liked John the Baptist, but in the end, he killed him. He beheaded him because he said, I have to keep my promise. I have to keep my promise that I did to Herodias' daughter because she did this little dance. And so now I need to kill unrighteously. I need to kill John the Baptist. And that's what he does. So he in the end damns himself by killing a good person.
So what you're saying then is that atheism is a rebellion, an active suppression of the knowledge of God that everyone has, as we read in the book of Romans, but they suppress it because he does not do what they want him to do, or his laws are not what they want to do. And so they purposely suppress it, saying that there is no God, fully knowing good and well that there is a God.
Yeah. God has not hidden the fact that God exists, everything in the world. And now let me try to see if we can move on to some of the intellectual arguments that people have posed and some criticisms. Maybe we could have back and forth, but what the atheist proposes is true and the world is simply just material, then he or she is at a very tough point, because there are immaterial things, principles, laws that uphold the material. Mm-hmm. And the material cannot make the immaterial, because the material can only beget material. The immaterial has to go first. And this is where, again, we could have the back and forth. So let's take one thing. We could do physics, but we could do also, this is what I said. Before the Big Bang, there had to have been the law of physics. Otherwise, there is no Big Bang.
Yeah.
And so the law had to be there before the material. But the law of logic has to be there before your argument against God.
Yeah.
Otherwise, your argument against God makes no sense.
By the law of logic, what do you mean by that?
The laws of logic are things like presupposed understanding of reasoning. We could also talk about the law of non-contradiction.
Okay.
We could talk about the demand of purpose or explanation. Things like that. There are laws of logic that have been used over the thousands of years we've been alive by Aristotle and so on. And we've come to understand that these laws are immutable laws. They like, you can't have like the law of identity. You can't be one thing and another completely different thing. You are that one thing. So like, this is where, we would continue to use these laws of logic in our debate and reasoning to find out who the true God is. But the atheist goes and denies that, then that's a big problem if the atheist does. And I think an intellectual atheist will not. But this is where C.S. Lewis would also quip that he would say this, and I'm quoting from him: "If my mental processes are determined wholly by the motions of atoms in my brain, I have no reason to suppose that my beliefs are true, and hence I have no reason for supposing my brain to be composed of atoms." The only way that you know that anything exists, and this is, reducing it now,
Yeah.
is by God.
Yeah.
God is the only way you know that anything exists. The only reason why you can argue even about the existence of God is because of God.
I know that this might be a little tedious, but could you go into that? Because I think there may be some that have heard this, but haven't really heard it fleshed out. Like, what does that mean? Like, what do you mean it has to be God?
Without laws, without, let's say, the immaterial existing, there can be no material because they are the foundation of the material, meaning these are constants for the material to exist. If these immaterial things were actually mutable, meaning the law of non-contradiction is not true, meaning you could be one thing and then another thing at the same time, then everything would cease to exist. Like, we couldn't have the material universe as as we know it. Mm-hmm. And because of things like that, what was your question again, precisely?
It's you said that we can think because, like, everything that we see is because of God. Like, God is at the foundation of that. But when you talk about immaterial, material, what do you mean that God is the foundation and without God nothing would exist?
So for us to know that we are arguing on that same plane, we're arguing in a way that is coherent. We're arguing that, there are principles underlying reality, means that something would have begotten those principles. Something would have begotten the immaterial, and that's God. So God is the one that laid the foundations of the world, like it says in Genesis 1. And then he started making the material.
Yep. So when you say that even for you to make the argument that there is no God, you have to presuppose logic, which presupposes God. What you're saying by that is, for you to make an argument that God does not exist means that you are using logical argumentation or seeking to use logical argumentation to get there. But for you to do that, logic has to already have existed. For logic to exist, which is a system of laws, right, of thinking, for that to even exist, there had to have been a God that created these laws of logic. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, if you want something consistent, you want something rational, you want something reasoned or reasonable, we understand that it has to come from a reasonable mind.
Yep.
There must have been a mind to have put all these things forward, because purpose demands a mind, I should say, right? Nature demands an explanation. Purpose demands a mind. And that mind is God. Now, it doesn't specifically mean that it's the Christian God, but it is God. Atheism is saying that there is no God, which is probably, like I said, one of the more easier arguments to debunk.
Yeah.
But I get it, that there are arguments against that atheists have used, because people will say things like, it's circular reasoning. By the way, if you remember TAG, this is easy. TAG is the transcendental argument for God, okay?
Okay.
So think of anything transcendent. It presupposes God or a God. But if you remember that, then the argument that atheists have used is, well, that's circular reasoning, because, transcendent argumentation is begging the question, because it assumes that God is the foundation for logic. Then you assume that God exists because logic exists. It's just, because you have the rational mind already, the logic is there. And so this argument will not necessarily compel you if you're an atheist, right? It's not going to be persuasive unless you're already a theist, right?
Okay.
So how would you respond to that?
Wait, I don't understand. Because you're assuming that God presupposes logic, It's circular reasoning, you're saying?
Because there's logic, there's God, but there's God, there's logic. It's a circular argument.
But a circular argument isn't necessarily a wrong argument.
Yeah. Well, you could say that then it's not a circular argument. It's a transcendental argument, which is different than a circular argument. And so how is logic possible? Transcendental means it's linear. And so it's not that God exists because logic exists. Mm-hmm. It's not that logic exists because God exists, that kind of thing. We are saying that he is the first cause. There is no cause of God. There has to always be a cause. So he is the starting point. Mm-hmm. God is the starting point. From there on, there's all these things. And the reason why we have any kind of science is looking at the outcome and then trying to backtrack to see what the cause is, right? And so that's why we have the scientific method. There are theories that you would purport, and then you would do experiments to see if you could come up with the same thing that you saw before. Like, I'm going to put in these factors. I'm going to put, this in this contained environment to see if I could come up with that same thing that I ended up seeing. And so you want to go back. And the reason why it's not circular reasoning, it's not God, therefore logic. It's logic, therefore something like God. So you want to go back. Because there's logic, there has to be something that has to be the first cause. Now, again, I didn't say that the laws of logic necessarily prove that the Christian God exists. And that's why the debate had been there for thousands of years, from Plato to Aristotle to Plato to Moses to Philo saying that the first thing that we got to talk about is Moses, because he was before Aristotle, he was before Plato, and they borrowed on his logic. So if you're using someone else's reasoning and borrowing on his logic, then that has to be the more foundational aspect. So God is the foundation of all the things that we understand to be true, and this is where Brian's favorite Van Til will come to, or Aquinas might come to, that the laws reflect a rational, reasonable, and a purpose-giving mind, right? And so this is the precondition for anything to exist. There needs to be something eternal, unchanging. What was that? Was that the hymn that I really enjoy? Immortal, invisible, God only wise, right? Yeah. There has to be that for any of these abstract principles to come out forward from. And so this is what we call the logos, or the logos. And this is what John argues in John chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning was the logos. And so these are things where people will see, if you have something purely random, purely material, you cannot have society, you cannot have reason, you cannot have the world as we know it. You can't have material as we know it without these things.
So then I guess atheism is somewhat militant in that it's an absolute statement, right? There is no God, which we talked about. Even as a statement doesn't make sense, and it points to God. But agnosticism seems to kind of lay off the gas a little bit, because they're saying it's impossible to really know, right? We're finite beings. How can we know something that's infinite? So we don't know whether divine beings or being exists or not. We just don't know. Isn't that, some people could say, isn't that more of like a humble approach, rather than Christians who are saying, no, this is the right God, this is the correct God, and atheists saying there is no God?
Yeah, I think agnostics are probably, to me, more on the cop-out side.
Yeah.
And so you can't cop out on stuff like this. So here's the argument here. If you had argued that because of logic, there needs to be reason behind it, there needs to be a mind behind it, the agnostic, even the atheist, they might argue that actually you don't need a God behind it, because logic can be self-sufficient. It can be self-sustaining. there's no fundamental reason for 2 plus 2 to equal 4. It just does. It just is. That's what they might argue. So it's called the self-sufficiency argument.
Okay.
So 2 plus 2 equals 4 just because 2 plus 2 equals 4. And, why do we exist is not asked. For me, that's the cop-out. 2 plus 2 equals 4 might be a brute fact, right? It might be just you might be purporting that it's a self-sufficient fact, but the why question isn't answered. Why does 2 plus 2 equal 4? Or how does 2 plus 2 equal 4? Meaning, how did the reality of 2 plus 2 equal 4 come into existence? There is an immaterial nature to 2 plus 2 equaling 4 that has to be sure, that has to be assured, that has to be given, that has to be laid out, that makes the material universe run. A mindless cosmos, a random set of structures don't produce order. In fact, what we do know is that chaos begets more chaos. Chaos does not beget order. It doesn't beget order. Chaos can sometimes seemingly produce order, but it isn't order on further inspection. And so those are things where we need to continue to look at, especially when you look at the intricacy of the order in the universe. This isn't some random, the waves came and they're on the shore, the sand that has been eroded looks like a square. Wow, look at this random thing that happened. This is the waves came on the sand shore, and what has come up is the entire exact map of New York City. That's what we're talking about. Chaos does not beget order. Chaos begets more chaos. Disorder begets more disorder. The only thing that can bring something to order is a mind. And this is why we know that there has to have been intelligent design in nature. This is why Romans 1 is saying that people know that there is a God. Because if you look around, there's order. A mind put it together. For you to deny it is to put a veil over your eyes, to vehemently put plug your ears with your fingers, and to just scream, saying, I'm not going to listen, I'm not going to listen, I'm not going to listen. And so those are things that we need to keep in mind if we are going to, let's say, minister to an atheist, but at the same time, if he brings up arguments like this or she brings up arguments like these, we should have a good answer for that.
This is what R.C. Sproul says concerning agnosticism. I mentioned the young man I talked to at the door 2 weeks ago whose friend introduced him as an agnostic. The Greek agnostis means without knowledge. The agnostic portrays himself as a less militant form of atheist. The atheist boldly declares there's no God. The agnostic says, I don't know if there's a God or not. I'm agnostis. I'm without sufficient knowledge to make a firm judgment on this matter. The Latin there, incidentally, is ignoramus. And I said to the young man, I said, you say that you're an agnostic and you're sort of being gentle about your atheism. You think that you're not as militant and maybe you're hedging your bets. But don't you realize that your agnosticism puts you at greater risk and exposure to the wrath of God than if you were a militant atheist? Why? Because not only do you refuse to acknowledge the God who reveals himself plainly to you, but you're blaming God for your situation, saying he has not been clear. He has not given you sufficient evidence. And so you add insult to injury to the Almighty by your feigned lack of militance, but your hostility against God is coming through and you need to repent of it because you know as well as you know your own name that God is. Oh, that was pretty cool.
Yep.
But I guess I think that's kind of maybe the argument though. It's you're just being kind of, you're not being aggressive, you're kind of helping everybody out. You're being the middle ground. Like, I don't know. Maybe he is there. Maybe he's not. I'm not really sure. But what you're saying, what R.C. Sproul's saying is even you not being sure is wrong. Because I think oftentimes when people say they're not sure, they just don't want to be wrong, right? Or they don't want to offend anybody. But you saying that you're not sure about a certain thing is wrong.
Yeah. It's like when you use a tool that someone's given you, but you don't care why they gave it to you. You just use the tool. And then someone comes up to you, is like, who gave you the tool? It's like, it doesn't matter, does it? It's like, actually, it does matter. They gave it to you for a reason, didn't they?
Yeah.
And so if someone gave you a tool and you use that to kill people, and the person that gave you the tool says, you shouldn't do that. That's not why I gave you the tool. Give the tool back. You'd be like, what? It's like, what? And so that's just a very, very, I get probably a trite example, but there's purpose behind things. And this is what we always try to find. What's the meaning of life, you know?
Yeah.
And then if an atheist would ever think, what's the meaning of life? They would be beside themselves, because that goes against the atheistic doctrine.
Right.
That, you know, this is just random chance and random happenstance. Why do you love things? Oh, it's just random. You know, I just feel love. So in the atheistic worldview, if everything is just random chance and nothing really has true deep purpose or meaning, then the reason why I don't want to kill you right now is probably because of some kind of evolution that has happened where this is probably better, but there's no moral foundation for that. So if that evolution changes and I need to kill you, then the atheist would have no problem also than saying, something has evolved, I think I'm going to kill you now. And I do believe that you see it happening in the world today, in our society today, where I just give you a current event example. 10 years ago, Elon Musk was worshipped almost by the left and the people that were climate activists, because that was the cause to go with. And now they are burning up Teslas and Tesla dealerships.
Yeah.
Because he is Hitler. I think he's Hitler. What is he now? Something like that. Is he Hitler?
He's just a
they
bad
just hate
guy
him. He's a
at one
bad
point,
guy.
yeah.
Right? He's worse than Hitler, maybe. And so because of that, we need to kill him. We need to blow up every Tesla. Even if it's my neighbor who shares my views, owns a Tesla, it doesn't matter. They have to die. And so that kind of evolution that takes place so quickly in someone's mind with no moral grounding, saying, like, you can't think that blowing up Teslas is bad. No, because I'm fighting evil, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where's their moral grounding? They don't have a moral grounding. They have no God. So what happens? It's an infinite regress, meaning this kind of disorder will beget more disorder, will beget more disorder, will beget more disorder. The people that are burning up Teslas, or if you are so mad that you believe that Tesla dealerships need to be blown up, you need to subject yourself to the will of God. You need to subject yourself to His order. And so, you know, that's why I'm saying, even for the Christian, or maybe especially for the Christian, when something upsets you, the first thing that we do is we bring it to the Lord in prayer. If a leader does something that upsets you, you bring it to the Lord in prayer, and you pray for that leader, even if it's someone like Nero, you know. And I gotta tell you, no one we've had is anything close to Nero, and yet Paul still says you gotta pray for the emperor, you gotta honor the emperor.
Yeah.
That's a tough one, maybe for Christians today to recognize, but it's a truism. It's from God that we understand this.
So for atheists and agnostics who are agnostics are kind of like weak atheists, I guess, soft atheists. Obviously, they don't believe in God. But on the flip side, there is theism, where there is belief that there is a God. And I think perhaps this may be more popular today, where if you have a conversation, someone may say, you know, I believe that there's a God out there. There's a higher power. There's a divine creator somewhere, right? Because logic doesn't make sense unless there is someone that created it. So there is a creator out there somewhere. I just don't know who that is. There might be gods. It might be a God. Like who is it? And I guess most idolatry and most religions would go under theism, right? So for example, like even Hinduism or even Roman, Greek mythology, whatever it might be, it falls all under theism, right? The belief that there is a God or gods, but it's not the true God. So how would you talk to somebody like that? Obviously, we don't have a lot of people that believe in Zeus and Poseidon and stuff like that today, but there are still people that say, you know, I guess there is a God, but that's just about it. He's just there, whatever.
Yeah, people believe in the supernatural for the most part. You know, people look up their, what do you call that in astrology? They look up their
Supernovas.
What? Horoscopes. That's it.
Oh,
They look up their supernovas.
zodiac signs.
He already said horoscopes, bro. So I didn't get to. Let me just get to this part really quick. There are people that will attack your presuppositions to say that you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Therefore, agnosticism is actually the more intellectual place to stand on. So people like Bart E. Ehrman, He would write many books on this. These are books that I had to read in my studies in seminary. But interestingly enough, but these are things where people come up and try to dismantle your foundational belief, where, for Christians, it would stem from the Word of God, the Bible, because He's the ultimate revelation, like we see in Psalm 19, right? First, nature gives us who God is, or that God exists, and then the second half of Psalm 19 is the specific revelation of who God is, meaning Yahweh. But, and so people will try to dismantle it by attacking your presupposition, by attacking the basis of your knowledge of who God is.
Yeah.
And so we need to be able to stand up to stuff like that. I have no doubt that Barty Ehrman is a brilliant man, and that he comes up with all these, he'll attack you on your belief in the Bible by going to manuscript errors, by the differences in the copies that we have, by the sheer number of errors that we might see in certain copies, and things like that. And then you as a person might be like, oh, I didn't know that. See, you placed your whole faith in the Bible, and yet there are all these errors. How can you fully trust that it's true? And so there are people like that. And so I don't think all agnostics are intellectually, bereft or bankrupt. I think there are very, very highly intelligent people out there. But the Word of God stands true, and that it is folly to the Gentiles or the Greeks, right? A stumbling block for the Jews.
Yeah.
But it's folly to the Greeks. And so to the highly intelligent, believing the Bible can seem like foolishness. And so that's what we see actually happen in real time in life today. When we get to deism, that there is a God, and how do we face which God it is, I think we are at a point now to show that the Christian God is the true God because, again, of the underlying principles of the universe. If we still want to go on this trajectory of apologetics, then the underlying principles of the universe shows the character of God.
You said deism. Is there a difference between theism and deism?
With the definitions that you've used, I'm
Right.
using that.
Okay.
So that there is, not just deistic, moral therapeutic deism, but I'm talking about anybody that believes in a God that's not Yahweh.
Okay.
Let's put it that way then.
Okay.
And so if that's the case, then we need to show that the Christian God is the true God, right? How come the Muslim God isn't the true God? Because, apparently Islam believes that it is the truest and most authentic revelation of who God is because it's the last one, with the Quran being out there.
Yeah.
And so why is that different from, let's say, the Old Testament and the New Testament and things like that? And why are they vehemently against the Trinity? Because God doesn't beget. They might argue God cannot have a son, like that kind of thing, because God is eternal and God is one. And so it depends on what they're coming at you with, but I would say the Christian characteristics, meaning the characteristics of God that have been purported in the Bible, are the ones that most reflect reality. And you could prove that with the arguments that they might bring up. Since we're on Trinity, we could bring up Trinity. There had to have been a Trinity, otherwise God was alone. And that again defies really the logic that we understand to be true in reality, and things like that.
So how is that true?
If there's no Trinity, there was no love before creation. That means God depends on us for love. That's why love is not a primary doctrine in the Islamic doctrine, okay? Because there was nothing before God, and so God can't love anything else, right? But in the Trinity, that's not true.
Yeah.
And so even for the doctrine of love, we know that love had existed, service had existed, order had existed even before creation. Otherwise, none of these things exist. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So in the Trinity, we see these things to be true because that reflects the universe, and it reflects our understanding of the first cause being God.
So the first time we see love is in the Trinity.
I don't know about the first time, but before time, yeah. Got him. Got him with the timeline.
So if we're talking to someone that is Muslim, I think again, and I keep on bringing up fears that people may have, and you did say that you need to have knowledge in your own faith, you need to have knowledge in the gospel to be able to share it effectively, and that is more important than knowing other people's beliefs and whatnot. But I think, like you just said, Muslims believe that their revelation is the most recent, it's the most updated. It's what's the new Apple one?
iOS update?
Yeah.
I don't know. 60 million.
It's Apple. It's Sierra Ventura 90.7.
Oh yeah,
Something like that.
very good.
But that's why Islam is the true religion. Outside of us saying, "Hey, this is what the Bible says. You have to believe in the Bible, and this is what the Word of God says." Outside of that, there's really nothing that you could really say to a Muslim to convince him or her that he's believing in a lie. How do you even go about doing this?
So I remember when I was not a pastor, and I was helping out a youth group, and we're putting up Christmas lights in the church outside because that's what we did every Christmas. We don't do that in our church. It's kind of sad.
Like the colored lights?
Yeah, we would put up lights outside the church building. We don't even have a Christmas tree outside. It's like
people don't really walk around our area. It's not.
It's like no one knows it's Christmas, that we celebrate Christmas. So this Muslim guy stopped, and he started saying that he was very, very, very serious, and he was very outspoken. He was almost loud, and he was telling the youth students, and I was far away I wasn't near them, how Jesus didn't die on the cross, that us believing in him is folly, it's stupid. Muslims do not believe Jesus died on the cross. And then the youth students, they didn't know what to do. They were just like, they were embarrassed. They didn't know how to respond. So I saw the youth pastor go in. So by that time I was walking in. And then I saw the youth pastor go to the Muslim guy. You believe what you want to believe, we'll believe what we want to believe. And I'll get out of here, that kind of thing. And I couldn't help but to think that was a missed opportunity. Because this Muslim man clearly wanted to share his views.
Yeah.
And then to see also, maybe to some degree, how we would not only respond, but if we had an answer to his claims, his criticisms against Christianity. And so, yeah, if a Muslim person comes up to you and goes, yeah, Jesus didn't die. It's actually, that is one of the core tenets of our faith, that Jesus died and he was risen. Like, he was risen by God the Father. Not only do we have what we see written in the Bible, but what the Bible is showing us is we have over 500 witness accounts of Jesus, of people seeing the resurrected body of Jesus. People could have debunked that. The first generation, it was like, I didn't see that. That wasn't me. Immediately. And secondly, if Jesus did not rise again from the dead, why did all these disciples put their lives on the line for that? So that they could live a poor, humiliating life and then eventually get martyred? Is that why? Because they didn't get any claim. They didn't get any power. They didn't get any recognition in their lifetime. They died a terrible, poor, pathetic death. Why would they do that if this wasn't true? If this was true, then, maybe they would have done that. But even then, why wouldn't you run away if your life was on the line? Unless there is a promise that they held on to, which was greater than what they held on to in this life. And so we have multiple accounts. There are three reasons now that I gave you why it had to have been that Jesus died and rose again. And this is what the Muslims don't believe. If you bring them that, either they will reject it or they will accept it. Okay, I accept that Jesus died. And yes, if Jesus died and was risen again, then that means that what he says is true, that he is the only way, the truth, and the life. Everything that he has purported has to have been true because God verified it by resurrecting him. if that's the case, then you need to put your faith in Jesus and not Muhammad. Because what he's saying is antithetical to what Jesus is saying. Right.
So I think someone can know all these things, but feel like they can't say these things because they're afraid of what if they have better evidence. So the reason why I say that is because, okay, we can
sometimes you got to fail. Look, I think more Christians are afraid to fail than they are to be bold. And, you know, so I'm not the master at this at all. I'm not saying that I'm like this great apologist or anything like that. The reason why I'm able to say certain things or respond in a certain way when people do come up to me is because I've been doing this ever since I was, I think, in middle school. Mm-hmm. People would respond in this manner. It's like, you have to believe in Jesus. It's like, no, F your Jesus. In middle school, in the bus. And I would have to respond. You think I had the best responses then? No. Like, as time went on, you get that developed. You can get trained all you want. And I think this is what happened in seminary. Like, you and Brian got trained in Westminster and how to respond, some level of apologetics. That's great. But you're trained, but you never get to use that. Then you won't know. In your mind, you'll have all these scenarios that you could have done. But you won't know if you can actually beat someone in a sparring match. You won't know unless you actually go out there, right? In an actual scenario. And so maybe that's something that we should keep in mind. You could be trained or you might not be trained, or as well, I should say. Everybody has been equipped. If you've read the Bible, you've been equipped. But everybody's been equipped. Maybe some have been equipped better than others. I'm not, I don't know until you actually go out there into the field and show me the stuff. And if you've never talked with a Muslim about this, if you've never talked with, let's say, an atheist about this, then yeah, of course you're scared. Of course you might have some doubts because you actually never showed any, capability on your own. You just maybe have these scenarios in your head. And I think that's where a lot of Christians might be at, where you've never actually had a conversation with somebody. And so if you've never had a conversation with somebody that disagrees with you on this, then maybe it's time. And so, even in Japan, I remember going, and there was a man that I spoke with. He was younger than me, but he was old for a single man. And I think he was in his 30s. And he hung around because I think he wanted to find a woman to get married.
Okay.
But he had trouble believing in God. But he was a physics guy. So I don't know if I shared this on the podcast, but he was a physics guy. And I was able to share with him all the laws of physics that I, really enjoyed as a layperson. I'm not a, physics expert, but as a layperson, I enjoy these laws of physics. I enjoy things like the laws of thermodynamics. I enjoy the law of relativity. I enjoy understanding gravity, gravitational pull, certain constants, and things like that. And I was able to explain to him about how this had to have come from an origin. And I was able to explain to him that, the origin had to have been there, but the laws of physics had to have been there before for any of these things to happen. For even like the rotation, even if it's ever so minusculely slowing down, that means it was faster at one point. Mm-hmm. If it was faster at one point and now things are slowing down, who spun it? And things like that. These questions had to have come forth. How did it get spun? Things like that. Our rotation, things of that nature. How do we come to this place, this hurling ball of fire that's flying through the galaxy with these 9 planets, including Pluto, right? These 9 planets are following into what? What is it revolving around? The supermassive black hole? What is it revolving around? Who spun it into orbit? Who launched it? Those are questions that have to be asked if you really like physics, especially astrophysics. And you can't stay on the whole, was it Neil deGrasse Tyson, where everything is just self-sufficient. It doesn't need an explanation. People demand an explanation because nature demands an explanation. If you stay on that, it makes you an imbecile. It makes you an ignoramus. Because if you really truly purport to be someone who seeks knowledge, you won't stop asking why. It needs to go back. So these are questions that I was able to, answer because there has been back and forths between me and people who like science, for example. Like I remember talking to you about the earth science teacher that I talked to in Barnes and Nobles when I was talking with a friend about evolution. And the earth science teacher just slid into our conversations like you used to slide into other people's DMs, but he was slide into our our conversation, and I was able to have a conversation with this non-believer about what I thought of evolution. Yeah, so the point is you got to get yourself out there if you're having conversations. If you're afraid and you never put yourself out there, you'll never develop. That's what it is.
Yeah.
You just got to put yourself out there. Especially if you see the opportunity. If you have a coworker who mentions to you that they're atheist, that's like a vegan telling you that they're vegan. They're asking for it. They're asking for some kind of response. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know. Should we be praying for opportunities? I feel like this is kind of scary, though. So I know that we should evangelize, but I don't know if people would go as far as praying for opportunities to share the gospel, because I think people might be scared to do that. But should we be doing that?
I think if your spirit is convicting you, yes, of course. I think you have to go with your convictions. I don't necessarily look for opportunities when it comes to, let's say, apologetics, but it just seems as though in my life that it's always been in my door.
That's what Reacher says. Danger finds me.
Are you talking about Jack Reacher, the fictional character?
Alan Richardson, yeah.
Okay.
That's what he says. He says, danger finds me. He watched it. He knows. He knew this season.
He watched it straight. He didn't, as soon as it came out, he watched every
Brian
episode.
is good at opening his eyes and just going. He just kills shows. Murders them. Show killer. Anyway.
Who's the one that got me into Severance? You guys?
Christine was into it. Got Brian into it. Got me into it. See? Look at him. Look at him.
So Brian is the original.
See, look at him. He's like, I watched it first. He opens his eyes and just goes.
So Brian watched it and everybody, and I was last.
I guess so, yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, so thank you for that. I think it's helpful because, like we talked about, there are a lot of people that don't believe God and don't believe in God. And I think it's a helpful place for us to start to even think about how we can respond and how we can evangelize and how we can think about praying for those who are around us. There are some questions and there will be answers.
We need a beat.
And, we talked about how at work from home, you may not be as faithful to your work as when you're in the office. But what if it's a slow season? How do you, I don't know, what do you do? How do you fill up that time? Do you just keep on asking for more work or what do you do here?
You might get fired. Who knows? If your slow season's too long, you might be let go.
Oh, so you chose to be slow.
No. They just don't give you work and you weren't proactive in getting more work. They might just let you go. Look at this guy. He's not doing anything for 6 months. It's like, well, you didn't give me any work. I don't care. You're gone. We don't need you. That happens. Happens for sure. Especially if you're in some kind of contractual job. If you're a contractor or a consultant and you don't have work for a while, they'll let you go.
It's a dog-eat-dog world out there.
I don't know what that has to do with anything. But yeah. It depends on the exact scenario, to be honest. If you've been busy for a long time and you get a short break, you should be thankful for the short break.
Yeah.
But by slow season, if you're talking about an extended amount of time and you don't have any work, that might be troublesome. But I would say you'd have to fight your anxious spirit and don't be anxious. But in all things, continue to work diligently. So if you don't have any work, I wouldn't necessarily, so this is my kind of thinking. I wouldn't necessarily think that I would blame other people for not giving me work. I would just get work. and do work. I want to try to make sure that I am productive, not just personally, but corporately.
Right.
And so those are things that I encourage even our staff. Maybe before I get into that, maybe your work culture doesn't encourage that and you don't know what to do. And that's something that you feel like you're fighting an uphill battle on, trying to stay productive. But in our church, I encourage the staff to always find work if they don't have work. And if it's a slow season for them and they're not doing any work, they have no one to blame but themselves because there's always work to be done. And I always see things that are missing that staff doesn't pick up. Obviously, the staff isn't like omniscient. They're not going to know everything. But, if you know anything about our culture here, I tend to be slightly disappointed that when I pick up something, like, oh, this isn't done, then, we have like 5 staffers. Why didn't any of the 5 pick this up? And so slightly disappointed, but for the most part, I'm very happy because for the most part, the staff does pick up a lot of the slack around here. I would say, hope and pray for that culture. But not every work culture is perfect, I don't think any work culture is really perfect, but at the same time, try to see if you can find yourself to be productive, both personally and corporately, as best you can.
And that is it for this wonderful morning. We thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. Join us next week. We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight. Finish the race.
Before we end,
yeah,
you're going to have a kid soon.
Yeah.
In like 2 weeks.
I think so.
Yeah, so if he comes early, we might not see Sam.
For what? For
a while.
No, I'll still be here for podcast. It's only it's like 2 hours a week. Yeah. Hope see you soon.
All right, 1, 2, 3.
Peace.